The Senate Bill 493, which both bodies have signed off on and is now before the governor to decide, reduces transfer students. It doesn't eliminate transfer students. So we want to keep the transfer law in place. Is that a fair statement?
I think it would be important for everybody to understand what we tried to do with this bill, which was to get students who are in failing buildings, in failing school districts, into successful buildings, whether that was in their own district or in a nearby public school system or into a charter school in their district or a private non-sectarian school in their district. That was the prime point of this entire bill, was to get students immediately out of a failing educational environment and move them into a successful environment.
Are we making too much of going from 2 paragraphs to 135 pages? Is that just the way the business is done these days, or is this trying to be all things to all people?
Well, we tried to restrict what was in the bill to just education items that dealt directly with the transfer law that was in place already and how we would address that. So, but there were a lot of considerations. We worked very hard in the House to get buy-in from everybody, every constituency. The Black Caucus met in my office 3 times on this bill. We met with the Democrats as well as the rural Republicans, who are generally opposed to any type of education reform. So we met quite a bit with the groups in the House, and we also met with the senators who were important, who were working on this bill over on the other side.
Doug, what role would you like to see charter schools play?
Well, I think that it's important to remind everyone that charter schools are public schools. They are tuition free. They are held accountable to the same performance standards as any other public school in the state of Missouri, and they have to be in compliance with state and federal regulations. So charter schools are an option for families, and that's the role that I think charter schools can really play in Normandy and in other unaccredited districts as time goes on, is the ability to put another public school option in the community where families are living that provides them a high quality education.
So what can they do that the public school, the traditional public school as we know it, can't do? Why would a charter school work?
Charter schools have a little bit more autonomy. They have their own governing board that is responsible for the operation of that school and the oversight, a little more flexibility in the way that they are able to structure the spending of their budget focused on one school and the students in that school. Charter schools traditionally have a longer school day, a longer school year. They have more innovative practices they can put in place. And they also have smaller class sizes. And charter schools have the ability to make changes a little more quickly because they're not making changes that apply to an entire district. They're making changes to that immediate school and student population.
Are they more selective in the students they accept?
They are not selective. Charter schools are public schools, and so there are no enrollment criteria. They are tuition free. They're open to any child that lives within that attendance area.
And how big of a part of the conversation was this in Jeff City?
It was a major part. I mean, again, our goal was to get the kids out of an education situation that was not very good for them and get them into a high quality education environment. Charter schools are part of that. We wanted to give parents and students options to get out of this failing environment into a successful one. Charter schools have proven to be successful in many areas. Some have not, but Senate Bill 125 a couple of years ago addressed the failing charters. So charter schools play a big part in giving parents and students options.
Can you make the argument that, not to put you on the spot, that the two of you are in touch with what's going on in Normandy, or that the state lawmakers are, as a body, are in touch? We heard our first guest tonight say fear is his sense of the community.
Well, we've talked to a lot of people in Normandy and Riverview Gardens, and their representatives in the legislature come from those areas. So we talked with them a lot about this particular bill. Many of us in the legislature come from an education background. I was on the Kirkwood School Board for 12 years. So we understand education issues. I think in this particular case with Normandy, for instance, they've been provisionally accredited in that district for 20 years. This did not happen overnight. And we felt with the Supreme Court ruling last year that we needed to act this year. So we put together a bill that is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly went through a process that lasted almost a year in the House. We toured the state last year in the fall, all over the state, to ask educators what they felt about unaccreditation and provisionally accreditation throughout the state, and with an eye toward trying to fix this situation in Normandy and Riverview.
What I can say I'm in touch with is the right that a parent has, and what I think is fear from a lot of parents in Normandy and other parts of the state when they don't feel they have choices available to them when it comes to their most precious item, their most precious thing, which is their child. And ideally what we'd like to see is high-performing charter schools, a high-performing district, all of the options being high-performing, so a parent really isn't making a choice of trying to escape something, but they're really looking at all those options and saying, that's the one that best fits my child's needs, that's where they're going to go to school.
But the representatives who represent Normandy, Representative Smith and Representative Pearson, who represents Riverview Gardens, they don't like the bill. Is there any, were you surprised by that? And why are the two of the representatives who are closest to the situation not too happy with what the final product was?
Well, I think that there are special situations with both of them. I have a good relationship with both of them. The senators, by the way, that represent that district, all supported it and voted in favor of the bill. The Senate passed the bill 28-3 the week prior to adjournment. So I think that there was a lot of pressure on some of the representatives from the teacher unions to oppose the bill. And the private option is always an issue that gets people excited. And I think that was one of the issues that really caused a lot of opposition to the bill in our caucus as well as the Democratic caucus.
Well, now there's a lot of speculation that Governor Nixon will veto the bill because of the private option. How important was that private option to getting the bill passed? And why is it in there?
The Senate voted the bill out first with the private option when it came over the first time, 2 months before the end of session. I think the vote was 27-5. That was a pretty strong indication that they were not going to pass the bill without a private option. Again, it's one of the options that parents have, as well as charter schools and the transfer option. So in the House, which the private option is a harder sell, we had to really work hard with the rural Republicans first to get them to buy into it. And we watered it down quite a bit from the original Senate bill that came over. We put a lot of restrictions and guidelines on the private option so that it wouldn't be just open to any school district anywhere. We've restricted it strictly to unaccredited school districts or the failing school districts so that it can't be expanded beyond that point. I think that if the governor vetoes the bill, we go back to the 1993 law in which the limits are off. It's Katie bar the door for these receiving school districts. I would encourage the governor not to veto the bill. And if he doesn't want to sign it, just let it become law, and then we'll move forward. Because if he does veto it and calls us back into special session, my guess is we're going to send him the same bill.
If he vetoes it, is it possible to pass something in a special session without the main provision that he's objecting to, which is the private option?
I don't think so, because the Senate has clearly indicated in both their votes by overwhelming margins, 27-5 and 28-3, that they want the private option in there.
We're hearing on Twitter that the tuition aspect of this bill doesn't do enough, isn't going to fix it. Your thoughts on that?
I would agree personally. My original bill in the House lowered the tuition to 70% of the sending district's tuition. So for Normandy, which is $12,000, it would have lowered it to $8,400. But the Senate had a much larger number, a higher number, and we compromised on a number somewhat in between, probably closer to the Senate version. Personally, I don't think it goes far enough to help the sending districts.
Let's take a quick